Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you another Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode, I shall be reviewing the Spitfire F Mark 16. To provide you with a brief historical overview of the Mark 16, as we have already seen a historical overview of the Supermarine Spitfire in general, which may be viewed using the link in the top right corner of your screen, as displayed now, we have to go back to the start of 1943. And following on from the successful introduction of the Spitfire F Mark 9 to combat service with the British RAF by the end of 1942, Supermarine were already looking for means to improve the performance of the airframe, and this was achieved via two main means. Number one being the switching out of the original Rolls-Royce inline Merlin 61 engine for the more powerful Merlin 63 during the opening half of 1943. Yet, upon evaluating this engine, it was found that this was not enough, and during the second half of the same year, a Merlin 66 engine was to be incorporated, another inline Rolls-Royce type, but the difference was that this engine was designated for low altitude performance. And due to the overall success of the 1580 horsepower output, this engine was to be incorporated into all future Spitfire Mark 9 types, meaning that when these planes left the factory, they were designated as Spitfire LF Mark 9 to show that they were low altitude fighters. In parallel with this, most likely starting in the spring of 1943 all the way through to the end of the year, Supermarine were looking for means to increase the roll rate of the Spitfire, as the roll rate was limited by the elliptical wing design, by comparison with say the Focke-Wulf 190 Anton series aircraft, which was the main competitor to the Mark 9 and the reason for its rushing to combat service. In order to increase the roll rate, Supermarine decided to take one variant, the future Mark 16, and get rid of the elliptical wings for a clipped wing design. This was noted to increase the roll rate significantly, and it was the combination of these two changes that led to the Mark 16. What we should note here is that the Mark 16 with the Merlin 66 engine for low altitude is actually known as the Spitfire LF Mark 16, not F Mark 16 as depicted in War Thunder. Yet we digress. During the summer of 1943, the Mark 16 saw its arrival and initiation into production service, with a licence-built American copy of the Merlin 66, the Packard Motor Company's Packard Merlin 266, being incorporated into the aircraft, and due to reliability issues with the engine, the plane was to only see its introduction to combat service by the start of 1944, a little bit behind schedule. Other refinements included, but were not limited to, the switching out of the armament to a pair of 20mm Hispano Mark II cannons, backed up by a pair of 12.7mm Browning machine guns, with all the armament being based in the wings in a machine gun cannon pairing. Additionally, a bubble canopy was fitted to increase the view range for the pilot, allowing them 360-degree vision with the bonus of having a cut-down rear fuselage. The Mark 16 was to go on to see combat service as initially a fighter during the opening stages of 1944 over short ranges due to its limited fuel tank, and then regress into more of a fighter-bomber role with the arrival of the Griffin-powered Supermarine Spitfires. Nonetheless, the 1,054 copies of the Spitfire LF Mark 16 that were produced were to see combat service all the way through to the end of the Second World War. And with that being said, let us take a look how the LF Mark 16 handles in War Thunder. Hence, today's gameplay is taken from the ground strike map Grave Robbers Cliffs, and we are using the following setup. Omni-purpose ammunition for the 12.7mm Browning machine guns, reason being that the majority of the rounds within this belt consist of an armour-piercing incendiary round, the armour-piercing component allowing us to penetrate any armour on our target, whether it be fighter or bomber, and hit key components such as the engines, or more importantly the fuel tanks, especially in the wings. When you add in the incendiary component, this allows you to set the fuel tanks of enemy fighters and bombers on fire with relative ease, leading to some rather clean-cut burn-away kills as you fly off into the distance. However, we have not yet mentioned the majority of the rounds have a tracer component associated with them, and when we combine this with the stealth ammunition we are using for the 20mm Hispano cannons, we can see why. If you take a look at the profile of the Spitfire LF Mark 16 as demonstrated on your screen now, you will see that the cannons and the machine guns are mounted very closely together in the wings. This means where the machine gun rounds go, the cannon rounds will follow, especially when firing at convergence. And with the cannons possessing 3 high explosive rounds and 1 armor piercing round in the stealth belt, this leads to devastating effects when instant on either bomber or fighter alike. And you can use the tracer component of the machine guns to direct your rounds onto target, rather than using a tracer lead belt in the 20mm cannons. We supplement this with a 400m gun convergence, due to the more energetic style of play that I incorporate in the Mark XVI, opting for a boom and zoom style rather than turn fighter, as we are going to discuss. And finally, we have a 30-minute fuel load, as standardised for arcade mode, so that I may make it to the end of the game and mitigate any fuel loss through damage to the fuel tanks. Therefore, let us proceed, and we can see in our opening climb from roughly 2,000 to 2,500 metres all the way up to 5,000 metres or just shy of, we have made a significant portion of ground and got ourselves up to bomber altitude before anyone else. This is one of the key components of the Mark XVI's performance, especially in low to medium altitudes up to roughly 4,000 metres altitude. You can outclimb almost the majority of all your opponents at your battle rating of 4.7. Allow me to come right onto the back of a chain of enemy fighters and bombers. And here, having killed the pilot of the Spitfire Mark IIB, I decided to retain my bloodlust and go for the fighters instead of the bombers, most notably the IL-4 that dropped a bomb just shy of my right wing. I set the fuel tank of the Mustang Mark 1A on fire and take them out swiftly, with the Messerschmitt 19G2 realising that I'm on my way. But it is too late for them, and I achieve a critical hit, both in terms of hitting their oil tank and taking out their elevator. At which point, due to the performance in terms of the energy retention, I'm able to break up onto the back of the Lancaster B Mark III and take them out for my 3rd kill, with a 4th kill on the Messerschmitt 19G2 only coming in a matter of time, simply because they've got no control left to allow them to level out properly. Moving on, we level out at this point and note that even being at a speed of 475 km an hour and increasing, we are still accelerating very well, especially by comparison with the Spitfire F Mark 9, whose acceleration begins to depreciate, as we found, as we proceed above 400 km an hour. It is not the case here in the Mark XVI, until you proceed above 5,000 metres, and then this plane becomes very strange in my opinion. Here I decide to level out at roughly 5,150 metres altitude, with only increasing altitude very gradually at this point. The reason being, above 5,000 metres altitude in my opinion, this plane becomes highly unstable, simply because the engine is not designed to fly up at these altitudes efficiently, and as a result, the overall acceleration of the plane and climb rate begins to depreciate. Especially having to chase Messerschmitt 19 K4s in battle rating 6.0 games in this aircraft, and I've chased a couple up to roughly 8,000 metres altitude, where I've been a sitting duck for my opponents. Yet, we will talk about evasion a little bit later. At this point we decrease our altitude by braking very gradually onto the back of a Wellington, or rather into the beam shot of a Wellington I should say, and the same here with a Lancaster B Mark 1, coming from a more head-on perspective and braking onto the beam. In both cases here we opened fire at 0.6 km and put in our final shots at roughly 0.4 km, dead on convergence, and in the case of the Wellington we got the kill and we set the Lancaster on fire, showing us the lethality of the armament at its set convergence. Here I have 3 opponents trying to engage a friendly B-24 Liberator. They are all blind to my presence at the moment, with my cannons allowing me to dispatch the Yak 9P quite swiftly, and then I break onto the back of the Mustang Mark 1A, although the enemy F6F-3 Hellcat has soon realised my presence and proceeds to engage me. Here I break into a loop, yet the greater manoeuvrability of the Hellcat means they can come up underneath me and put a couple of 12.7mm rounds into my undercarriage. Whilst the Spitfire Mark XVI is durable, do not expect this to work if the plane that you're engaging has 20mm cannons or higher calibre. It can just about take a couple of 12.7mm rounds before it starts to take significant if not critical damage. And this means we can line up a shot on the Hellcat, but as you can see we opened fire at 0.2 km, well inside our convergence range, meaning that we cannot score any significant hits. And that is one of the key issues with the Mark XVI. If you are not firing at convergence, it is sometimes very difficult to do the damage that you require. And finally, our ace in a day is achieved with the Messerschmitt 19 G2 finally going down or the pilot bailing out. Yet my focus here is on the Mustang Mark 1A, and as they try to proceed into a head-on to dispatch with their 420mm cannons, I break up and over them, using a spiral climb here in order to mitigate their ability to get a shot onto target, thanks to the fact that my engine's performance at 4,000 metres is more than sufficient to entertain the performance of the Mustang's Allison engine. Here the Mustang is out of energy, and so they start to head back towards the ground. Yet, my opening burst takes out their engine, and I set them on fire to lead to another kill eventually. So we can see here, our overall performance in the engine means that we're able to swoop onto our targets with clear-cut efficiency, with 7 kills already in the bag, and at least 1 assist as well. At this point we go for a reload, and what is also important to note is the limited ammunition capacity of this aircraft. Whilst you have 120 rounds per gun in terms of the cannons, and 250 rounds per gun in terms of the machine guns, it is a rather limited ammo capacity, especially with a comparable plane of your battle rating such as the Messerschmitt 109 G2, with 200 20mm cannon rounds to the single nose-mounted cannon. At this point I see an enemy Typhoon and an enemy Focke-Wulf 190 A5 both breaking after a friendly Year 2 M105. I very quickly dispatch the Focke-Wulf 190 A5 at 0.5 km and proceed onto the back of the enemy Typhoon. Whilst they are set on fire here, I'm not taking anything for granted, and so I decide to dispatch the Typhoon Mark 1B. With 9 kills in the bag now, and really it should actually be, say, 8.5 for the purposes of giving gratitude to that Year 2 pilot, we can see here we've put ourselves right over the enemy spawn, and we have a Focke-Wulf 190 A5 U2 climbing directly up towards us, thinking that their energy advantage post-spawn will be enough to take me out. Yet, thanks to the additional weight they have in the form of their 20mm gondola cannon pods and my engine's performance, I can just break up, hammerhead over, and come down swiftly on them for my double ace. At which point I break back up once again, with now 3 enemy planes coming after me in the form of a Messerschmitt 109 F4, a Spitfire F Mark 9, and one other unidentified opponent. The Spitfire F Mark 9 is able to keep with me for a good portion of time here, yet due to the spiral climb that I am applying here, thanks to my very powerful rudder and very good roll rate, I am able to continually increase my altitude and weave out the way of the incoming fire, meaning that the Spitfire F Mark 9 never has the chance to get a clear shot on me, and I can take them out very quickly when I come back down on them. Here I do critical damage to their tail and their oil tank. It is not enough, and as I continue to pursue I get well inside my convergence at roughly 0.2 km, and so I decide to break off with my opponent wounded and the fact that I'm not going to be able to do any more damage here unless I make myself vulnerable to any other enemy planes coming away from the airfield or from the spawn. At which point I decide to pursue an enemy Messerschmitt 109 F4 attacking a friendly KI-61 Mark 1. At long distance, roughly 0.7 km, decreasing to 0.6, I open fire but I do no damage. Again, unfortunately here I just do not provide sufficient lead in order to do any damage with the machine guns or cannons in the first turn. But as we continue, and I am well within convergence here, meaning that a lot of my shots go wide, I have to give sufficient lead in the end to allow the left wing mounted cannon to hit the target, allowing me to achieve my 11th kill or 10.5 before I roll out. So we saw there, at higher speed I am still able to turn fight with my opponents, and so long as you keep your speed at roughly say 350 to 500 km an hour, with a preference being at roughly 450 km an hour in my opinion, you are able to turn fight with a good portion of your opponents. I'll say a Spitfire F Mark 9 or the Japanese types, including but not limited to the A6M3 Mod 22 Ko-Reisen. These are planes which will easily outturn you at a good portion of speeds, if not all. And that's the game over, with a 12th but discounted kill coming in the form of an F4 Trop right at the end. Yet with that being said, let us take a look at some post-game stats. Hence, we can see our 11 kills and single assist allowed us to net 49,816 silver lions, and we add to this tally with 2,352 research points, all going towards our research on the Tempest Mark II. We therefore conclude this review of the Spitfire LF Mark 16 by realising that it is a more energy-based variant of the Supermarine Spitfire Merlin engine series aircraft. This plane is the ideal energy fighter within the Spitfire class, simply because the clipped wings and therefore the high roll rate make it easy to engage targets in the midst of a dive, with your roll rate only starting to depreciate above 650 km an hour. At the same time, at low to medium altitude, extending from 1000 metres up to 4000 metres altitude, you've got one of the best climb rates at your battle rating of 4.7, equal only to the Focke-Wulf 190 D9 or the Ki-84 Ko. However, please be aware that above 5000 metres altitude, your engine performance in terms of acceleration and climb rate begins to depreciate, and the overall platform becomes unstable, meaning that planes such as the Focke-Wulf 190 D9, if allowed to push beyond 5,000 meters altitude, will slowly become out of your reach and make you an easy target. At the same time, this instability extends to low speed turn fighting, especially if your speed drops below 275 km an hour, whereby if you engage in landing flaps in particular, whilst you may be able to outturn your opponents to a small extent, you will lose the overall stability of your aircraft, and at roughly 230 km an hour, if you use rudder input, you may actually find you will force this plane into a slight spin, which is easily recoverable thanks to the instructor in arcade mode, but it can compromise the plane's life. Nonetheless, we can see that by comparison to the rest of our team, we came first. Not by a huge margin, but because we implemented the overall energetic nature of this plane and forced an altitude cap of 4,000 meters very early on. We took out a good proportion of the enemy bombers, if not gained assists. At the same time, we engaged in the enemy fighters pushing towards higher altitudes and used our overall engine power and high roll rate to dodge the incoming fire from planes such as the Mustang Mark 1A and the Spitfire F Mark 9. It meant in most cases we could force our opponents to bleed out all of their energy and into stalls, whilst we were still on the verge of entering a hammerhead, and we could swiftly come down and dispatch our opponents at our gun convergence. And whilst the armament on this plane is comparable to that of the Focke-Wulf 190 D9, the difference is that the D9 has the armament in the nose and the inboard of the wings. Meanwhile, your armament is concentrated very tightly in the wings, meaning that unless you fire at convergence or fire at a larger target such as an enemy heavy bomber, do not expect your rounds to hit the target easily, and you may have to aim off-centre in order to take out your targets, such as we depicted against that Messerschmitt 109 F4 at the end for our 11th kill. The ideal speed range of this aircraft, therefore, in my opinion, is roughly somewhere between 300 to 500 km an hour, with a preference at 450 km an hour, as this will allow you to outturn a good proportion of your more energetic opponents, whilst at the same time allow you to climb away from those who can outturn you, especially in the form of, say, an A6M3 Mod 22 Co-Raisin, a plane which is absolutely deadly if allowed to get onto the back of your tail in the midst of a turn fight. As a result, if you're looking for a variant of the Spitfire which is able to mimic the best qualities from the Focke-Wulf 190 Anton series aircraft and the Messerschmitt 109 G2, then look no further, because Merlin's last spell with the Spitfire series of aircraft in the form of the LF Mark 16 is just the fighter for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video and the new review format, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.